Hello, welcome to this session of Talking Tech, Women and Girls in ICT. My name is Nuala Polo, and I'm delighted to be representing Trilateral Research, and I'm very excited to be having a discussion about tech and tech careers with Dr. Eva Cheng, Director of Women in Engineering and Information Technology and Senior Lecturer at the University of Technology, Sydney. Before we get started, I'll just kind of give a bit of an overview of what Talking Tech is. So this is a series that celebrates girls and women in tech, being recorded around the world between Girls in Tech Day 2020 and Girls in Tech Day 2021, which will be the 22nd of April. And the objective of Girls in ICT Day is really to create a global environment that empowers and encourages girls and young women to consider studies and careers in the growing field of information and communication technologies. So the series is really trying to interest and inspire girls and young women with information about the range of ICT careers, to bring before a broader audience some of the role model women in tech and to share information about their career journeys, to offer diverse examples of how ICT is being used to support achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and other UN goals, and to showcase initiatives that are working with girls to support them in ICT. So the Talking Tech series is brought to you by the ITU, the UNICC, and the Office of the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, and is in support of Equals, the Global Partnership for Gender Equality in the Digital Age. So Trilateral is very pleased to be a partner in the session today. And to kind of kick us off, I will introduce myself and tell you a little bit about my work in this sphere and what it means for me to kind of be a woman in tech. So I work at Trilateral Research, which is primarily a research company based in the UK and the IE, and we do a lot of work on EU-funded research projects. So my role is called Research Impact Officer, and I work a lot in doing dissemination, impact creation, and communication for our EU projects. So that's kind of a focus on disseminating the results and getting people kind of engaged and making research more accessible to different audiences. So right now I'm working on 3 projects. One is the strategy project that focuses on kind of facilitating cross-border collaboration in crisis management. So as we get increasingly global and we have kind of more and more international crises, for example, COVID or climate change, how do we get different nations to kind of work together for better crisis management? I'm also working on the Sherpa project, which focuses on prioritizing ethics and fundamental rights in the development of smart information systems. So that's focused a little bit more on artificial intelligence. And finally, I'm working on the Tech Ethos project, which is looking at building in ethics and social values to the design of new and emerging technologies with high socioeconomic impact. So we're in the very early stages. We actually haven't even picked the technologies yet, but it's really a focus on how do we build in ethics and social values from day zero. It's not something we want to be adding retroactively, because ultimately these technologies are being developed for people. So how do we make sure that they're going to work within our ethics and social frameworks that we have? I think for me, it was really interesting to be invited to participate in this series because I don't necessarily think of myself always as a woman in tech. I'm not doing kind of technological development, I'm not coding, but it was good to reflect on kind of what does that mean to be a woman in tech and the importance of kind of bridging gaps between technology and other fields to make research more engaging and accessible, because technology is something that obviously affects everybody. And so how do we make that clear? How do we make it relevant? And how do we make it exciting? So that's kind of my role in this world. And I think that's a nice segue to introduce Dr. Eva Cheng, who is a little bit more technology focused, but also did a lot of work in kind of trying to bridge these gaps. So as I said before, this is Dr. Eva Cheng, the Director of Women in Engineering and Information Technology and Senior Lecturer at the University of Technology, Sydney. So Eva, maybe to start off would be great just to hear about kind of your journey, your career, and what does it mean for you to be a woman in tech?
Yeah, thanks for the beautiful intro. It's lovely to hear your journey as well. So how I got into tech was not necessarily a fully planned choice. I'm going to show how old I am by sharing my journey from high school, because that's when I discovered the internet. It was coming out as a consumer technology, and I was just absolutely fascinated by how I could just suddenly access information basically at the click of a mouse or a touch of a keyboard button, and then also be able to start communicating with people all over the world. that used to need like a long distance phone call, or it was a lot more complicated than it is now. So that's what led me to study a Bachelor of Engineering in Telecommunications. And I started to learn more about what networking means, what is telecommunications, what are mobile networks, how does the internet actually function. And through my degree, I then found what I actually love doing today. And it became a bit of an overlap of passion. So when I was in high school and as a child, I love music. Actually, I still love music. I still play. And I thought I had to choose, do I become a creative professional as a musician, or can I also explore my technology interests? So I ended up combining the two. And now what I work in is an area called signal processing, where it's computational processing of musical and audio signals. So it's kind of bridged the two gaps of what I love doing. So that's my journey. What do I feel like as a woman in tech? I think what it means to me is I get to work with all sorts of different people using technology in different ways to solve challenging problems that we face in everyday life. And in general, it's really about improving everyday livelihoods and access to opportunity, because we all interface with technology from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed, and that's all over the world. So it's the one kind of unifying factor in modern life. So, and to be honest, I'm also never bored. Tech changes so quickly and I love learning, and yeah, there's no excuse not to learn here.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's something really exciting about being in or around this field, is that there's always so much to learn. You really don't know what's coming next, and it kind of keeps you on your toes, which is, something that I really enjoy as well. I know that you're in the tech sphere, but you do a lot of work around kind of gender equality in technology. Could you tell us a little bit about your kind of role as the Director of Women in Engineering and Information Technology?
Yeah, so my role at the university is split. Half my time is as a teaching academic, so I teach first year engineering, and that's super fun. And then the other half is the role leading the Women in Engineering and IT program. And what that program does is we seek to encourage and support women to take on engineering and IT studies and careers. And that means addressing some of the core barriers to participation that we know occur quite early from the research. So we have a primary school outreach program that works with year 5-6 students to start building their interest and confidence and self-efficacy in working with technologies, and then continuing that into high school. And of course, it's not just us going into the classroom and working with teachers and the students, but also taking our own university students and industry professionals to really show what technology looks like in the workplace and what kind of interesting things people are working on and who works in technology. That starts to break some of the perceptions around who can and can't get involved in technology, or who should and shouldn't, because some of the really interesting work being done out there, but not being done by some of the stereotypical perceptions of what you might see and think. So yeah, that's the kind of work we've been doing.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. And I also like the idea of starting early, like going in primary school and kind of changing those perceptions, because, once people are in high school and they're starting to kind of make those decisions, maybe some of those decisions have already been made, because depending on what you decide to study or what you think that you're able to study, that can really shape your future career. Could you also maybe share a lesson that you learned along the way in this journey?
One lesson. Oh, that's hard to choose. There's been so many. I think one main one would be stay curious, because there is so much to learn out there, and it's okay to always have a beginner's mindset. We always learn from the start, and by developing this curiosity, you never know what you might find. So I never planned to be in the role I am now. And it's been a combination of formal study as well as volunteering work. How I got into gender equity and working with schools and mentoring programs with industry was through volunteering, and then through a bit of experience and meeting other people, it became a job. So yeah, I think curiosity and just putting your hand up for things, you just never know what might happen and what opportunities present yourself.
So your career in tech also then is kind of enriched and shaped by what you've done in other parts of your life, like in the volunteering work. And is that something that you would kind of really encourage, the development of other activities and passions in order to shape your career?
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of the most fun projects that I've worked on have been with very diverse groups of people. And it often just starts with a conversation of, what are you interested in? What kind of work are you doing? What would you like to do? And quite often people will just share what their passions are and what their challenges are. And then there'll be this opportunity to collaborate and bring strengths to the table. So examples of these could be, because of my creative musical background and passions in this area, I love hanging out with musicians, and they've also got fantastic ideas. They've always had fantastic ideas of what they'd like to do. But sometimes the implementation can be a bit of a challenge. And with an ICT and engineering background, that's where my strengths come in. I'm absolutely terrible at composing music, but what I can do is work together with creative people to kind of bring these ideas to life. And I must say, none of this has ever occurred from, a formalized meeting or writing formal research projects. It's always been through, a kitchen or a corridor conversation or a cafe conversation, and it all goes from there. So never be shy to ask people what they're working on, what they're interested in, or what it is they want to create. And yeah, something interesting is always going to happen.
Yeah. I think also the idea of bringing these different strengths to the table, I think sometimes like in your career path, I guess in my experience in certain fields, it can feel like everybody is an expert in what they're doing, but they're very kind of narrow and focused on what they're doing. And without kind of these conversations with people in different disciplines or different areas, you might really be missing out on something that could enrich that, in this example, technology development. Like you say, speaking with musicians that have these ideas that, are really creative and outside of the box and doing things that you might not necessarily think about in your traditional role.
And I think what the other fun part of it is working with other people and solving kind of wicked challenges pushes the boundaries of technology as well, because we're at the stage where fundamentals are quite strong. It's now how do we apply the technologies to solve these kind of challenging problems. And, by working with different people and getting diversity of thought in, that's when technology really starts to shift and become innovative.
And you do a bit of work as well, kind of with humanitarian engineering, correct? And so that's also thinking about kind of how are we going to use this technology to solve kind of real life problems?
Yeah, 100%. So this also started from a volunteering pathway. As a student, I discovered Engineers Without Borders. So another one of my passions in life is social justice and being able to apply technology towards social justice. And once I kind of figured out what Engineers Without Borders was working on, started volunteering, and that became part of my work life. I now teach into a first year challenge, which introduces humanitarian engineering to students. And that's been super fun to see how much impact technology can make in different contexts. So there's a lot of mobile technologies that are being rolled out across the world. And with most people having access to phones and internet, that means that app-based community development can be really successful. And that hasn't been necessarily the case, 10, 20 years ago. But with the technology now available, it actually becomes a whole new game in terms of international development. And not to mention, emerging technologies like blockchain, they also play a huge role in kind of furthering equity in general, not just gender.
And how do you think about, I guess, I think about this more in the frame of ethics, but I'm sure you think about it as well. How do you kind of build those from the start and incorporate them in the design so that you don't end up having to do something retroactively, which I think often is not as effective as we'd like it to be?
This is a great question. And I think we should be asking ourselves this question before we even get started with anything. And perhaps one of the things that I always try and keep in mind is why. What it is we're here for, who are we working with, who are we working for, and what is our purpose. So if we have clarity on that and everybody is clear as to what their role is and what are the outcomes and outputs, then at least we're on the same page to start with. And then by getting people involved at every single stage of technology development, and that ensures that voices are being held and there aren't any, say, unintended consequences or any biases that might be introduced into the technology. So I think it's this awareness of who's involved, who's got a voice in the room, but also who doesn't and who should.
Mm. And when you say working with people at every stage, would you kind of say then like co-creation and working with end users, like the just citizens? That's a really important part of technology development.
Yeah, technology at the end of the day, the users are all going to be people. So the more involved they are in the development of it, the more useful it's going to be, and also the more impactful and efficient in terms of actually solving the challenges that people are facing. But you all know what it's like when someone gives you a piece of technology and you're like, what am I going to use this for? If the voices of what the actual problem was introduced early on, then that wouldn't be the case. So yeah, I think it's a continual cycle of clear communication and just being aware that users are designers of technologies as well. You don't need to be a technology expert to do it. Design actually needs to involve everybody.
Yeah, super interesting. I was also going to ask you if you can share an example of maybe one or two things throughout your tech career that you're particularly proud of that you'd like to share with us today.
I think one thing would certainly have to be my doctorate, and not necessarily because of the technical pursuit. I'm very proud of the work that I do. I was working in terms of analyzing microphone signals to see what direction sound was coming from. That was challenging, but I think the other skills that I learned through the doctorate are also very useful today and very difficult to learn. So say, for example, resilience. You go through a lot of failure and trying and testing algorithms, experimenting and realizing actually this isn't going to work. But you know what? You can't build good algorithms without having issues. Like nothing's perfect from day one. So yeah, really learned about resilience there, but also communication. I actually love writing. I didn't realize that I loved writing as much as when I started to communicate some of my work, because it was actually quite challenging to tell people what I was doing because it got quite niche and it became a really creative challenge as to how do I make this interesting and relevant to other people. So something that's on my radar for this year as a priority is to actually communicate more about some of the work that we're doing so that technology does reach a wider audience, because they're the actual consumers at the end of the day. So if they don't know about what's happening behind the scenes, then this is the story that's untold. So that's one of my challenges. Other challenges I think would be teaching. I love teaching, and because that's part of the whole continual learning. Students ask fabulous questions. I can never claim to be an expert because whenever someone asks me a question, there'll always be something I don't know. And that's a journey of let's go figure it out, let's look it up and learn together. So I think that's another thing that I'm quite proud of to have developed, is teaching skills and being, I guess, very humble of knowledge that I do have and that I don't have, so that you know how you can help others, but also they can help you. Learning is very much a two-way process.
And do you think kind of being in that teaching and learning environment also opens the breadth of what you think might be coming? Like when you look to the future of technology, I'm sure your students might have different ideas or different kind of things that they're excited for than you might be thinking about.
Yeah, I think that's also super fun because I also teach first year where students have grown up with technology. I learned to live with technology, but our students have, almost been born with it. I do feel quite old sometimes, but it's still fun. And I think this is what's interesting to work with young people, is to see where technologies could be applied to solve some of our biggest challenges today. Climate change is one of the biggest. When we speak to young people in primary school, so one of the things they're most worried about climate change is it. Technology in some ways has created some of the challenges that we see, but at the same time, technology is going to be key to solving some of the climate challenges that we see. So I'm absolutely inspired to work with young people. I wouldn't shift it at all.
Have you ever had a question or comment from somebody in your class that has totally changed kind of your way of thinking about things, or that really shocked you?
I can't think of an example to mind, but what I will say is I've never taught the same thing the same way twice, because there's always learnings on how we communicate better or how things have shifted. And I think that's always a reflection on how fast things change as well. So we teach the same subject twice a year and we iterate even in a 6-month period. So continuous improvement in action. And I think that's something that's been a learning over the past year with COVID, is how do we transition this kind of learning and challenging and discussion and exploration online, which is enabled by technology. So some things that are possible now that weren't possible 5 years ago, but at the same time, some things are a little bit harder. So how do we navigate this? This is very interesting. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know my pathway has been kind of, technical training, studied, and then I've become an academic, highly educated formally. But you and I kind of ended up in a similar path where we're working in emerging technology. We love it. It's research driven. We ask curious questions. We run experiments and communicate the work that we're doing. How do you find your pathway and coming from a different background and getting into tech? Has there been any pinnacle moments that have been light bulb for you?
I think for me, kind of the interdisciplinary piece has always been huge. So when I started university, I really didn't know what I wanted to study. I just loved learning and wanted to be in school. So I did kind of like a broad philosophy program. It was called the Foundation Year program. And you just kind of read, like we started with the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Bible and the Odyssey, and we read like all the classics until maybe about 1960. And in doing that, it was just, I just was really interested in learning, but then felt like I was kind of missing my like math and sciencey piece. So then in my later studies, I started taking that back up, and I ended up doing a combined philosophy, math, and history of science degree. And people always were kind of like, oh, those are so different. Like, how are you interested in all these different things? And as I got further and further into my studies, I was like, they're not different at all. Like, they're different ways of coming at often the very same problems. And I think something that I realized or felt was that often there was so little communication. So people in philosophy are kind of thinking about these problems maybe in a big theoretical way, and that's how they go about problem solving. And people in like math and science are thinking about very similar problems, but in a really kind of analytical and practical way. And often there's not very much communication between the two sides. So I think that's something that kind of clicked for me, is I want to help link these together, because if you're doing the same work, often, if you do that communication, then you're saving yourself work because somebody else has already been thinking about this problem for so long from a different way. So yeah, kind of facilitating that conversation is something that's been really important to me. And so in my master's, I was focusing on philosophy of cognitive science, but also science communication. So how do we communicate often this really high level niche jargony research to lots of different people, because it does affect them, it is relevant to them, and it's really important, I think, as you say, to co-create and to work with them, because they have all these amazing ideas and insights that can enrich like research, whatever field it's in. So yeah, how do we engage them, and how do we make sure that they know what's going on? So that's kind of what's brought me here. It's definitely kind of a bit opposite to you, but it's funny that we've started kind of from these different places but ended up in a similar sphere.
Which I think is what's really interesting about tech, is there are so many ways to get into tech. You don't necessarily need a degree in it. You don't necessarily need to be an expert in it. I think it's just that interest in using technology to solve problems to help people. That's really it. Yeah, I'm really curious, and then this is a whole other conversation, but I'd love to hear more about, what you studied in the history of science. That's something I'd love to know more about, is, how did technology become so pervasive? And it's something I think we should study in technical degrees as well, as to the history of technology and engineering, because that helps to inform, our paths forward, and how do we not repeat some of the mistakes we've made in the past, but also what are the learnings, because there's been a lot of change in a very short period of time.
I think the biggest thing I got from that part of my degree that I'm very grateful for is like thinking about humility. Like everybody was so confident throughout the history of science and technology that their theory was absolutely the right theory and they were 100% right. And every 10 years, something else came on that showed that they were completely wrong, and it didn't work, or it could be improved, or it could be iterated. So I think it was really interesting kind of seeing how that progressed, and also taking that lens now and being a bit, having some humility and saying, the research we're doing is amazing. We're developing some really incredible technologies, but they can be improved. And, there's more to learn. There's always more to learn, and there's always something to kind of improve and iterate on. So yeah, that's something I loved learning and try to adopt now, just saying this looks great, but it's probably not perfect, because it never has been in the past.
I think that's the exciting thing of being involved in leading edge tech as well, is that you're contributing to pushing that edge just a little bit further, because everybody kind of has their piece in the puzzle. And nobody's going to come along and design the whole thing. We all need to kind of contribute to get there. So yeah.
I guess humanities is a really big kind of broad thing to say, but the humanities are kind of thinking about some of these maybe like philosophical questions. Is that something that's ever incorporated, would you say, in kind of more of a technology curriculum, or is that something people are thinking about or talking about?
I think it's occurring more and more, just because of that link between humanity and technology that needs to be reached. Another area that I'm particularly curious about is also around social technical anthropology, and understanding how people interact with technology, the impact that it can have, because yes, it's intended to improve livelihoods, but sometimes there are unintended consequences. And the more that we understand about how we interact with technology and each other, then we can have more informed decisions built in to avoid some of these unintended consequences. So I think the traditional humanities is separate to technology, is separate to economics, is separate to business is really no longer the case. We really have the need for cross-disciplinary thinking and problem solving, because otherwise we're going to only solve parts of big challenges.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I guess, what are you most excited for moving forwards as you think about, what is on the technology horizon?
I think your area in particular is going to be very interesting, because we know what AI might be capable of, and the technology is getting there, but we need to think very carefully about what we're doing with AI, who's working with it, who's designing with it. And that question of who is in the room and who isn't in the room is really critical here, and unintended consequences. So this is what I'm super curious about. Even thinking about the social technical anthropology of smart devices in the home, that's been a very quick introduction, and it's already started to shift how people interact with devices in the home, and now everything's internet connected. So I'm very excited about this kind of area. I think you're in the right space.
Yeah. No, it's a really exciting space to be in. And I think also, I mentioned this briefly at the beginning, but just being excited by the fact that I have no idea what it'll look like in, honestly, even 1 year, but never mind 5-10 years down the line. There's so much room for change. There's so much that we have no idea what we're capable of making. And I think I'm excited by, this cross-disciplinary fertilization. Even in one of the projects that I mentioned before, Tech Ethos, we're actually working with artists and galleries to create some installations and some light installations, but also art and science pieces that will be kind of physical representations of the research that we're doing, as a new way to kind of engage and communicate. And I'm sure they'll have ways of thinking about and engaging with the research that we never would have thought about before. So kind of getting these different people in the room that traditionally wouldn't be there, and maybe we wouldn't necessarily think that, creating an art exhibit based on a research project is going to add value, but it absolutely will. And we've even seen for the Sherpa project, we worked with an artist, and it was really effective in getting more general audiences in the public to stop and say, oh, this is really cool, and this is relevant to me. Because I think the relevance is something that for many people maybe is still missing, even though they use technology so much. When they think about these kind of high level research projects, they don't necessarily make the connection with how it affects their lives, but of course it does.
And I think the other fun thing about working with different people is also how technology is used in creative arts as well. So the new media art movement and video art and interactive art is really interesting. So I think something like the Microsoft Kinect, that originally was a gaming device, but then it became a motion capture device that was used for all sorts of different purposes. So unintended in a good way, and they've been used for a lot of different interactive art installations. It became really accessible because the cost was low.
Is there any, just speaking a little bit about this, do you have one maybe collaboration with a musician that you would want to tell us a bit more about? Was there a project that you've done that really excites you?
Can I talk about two?
Yeah.
So one was with my PhD student who's since graduated. It was a collaboration with biologists, and it was in the field of computer vision, where we were applying computer vision techniques to solve a biological imaging problem. Because in the past, the biologists were actually having to watch manually and track organisms through microscopic videos that they had recorded. And from a computer vision point of view, this is very much solvable with algorithms. The same algorithms that track where cars are moving for autonomous vehicles, it's not that different to adapt that to moving biological objects. So that was super exciting to be able to work with biologists and solve a very time-consuming challenge for them that wasn't that difficult for computer vision algorithms. And another collaboration I'd love to share is a more creative one. And that was working with a musician who has designed gestural instruments and how gestural instruments can be used to create sound. So that's looking at free movement and basically having any kind of sound environment that you would like. So it's been really, really fun to see, what kind of designs could we improve in terms of the usability, but also as a tool to teach technology. Because if you can code and if you can change the way you map the sounds into movement or movement into sound, then that can be a really fun way to get into technology very early on.
Very cool. So I guess you really kind of celebrate and think about technology early on. How is this something that we bring to people at a young age so that they can engage with it, but also see that they have the capacity to work with it maybe later on in life?
Yeah, because I think technology is going to be part of everybody's life, and to be confident and comfortable with it is really important. And just to be curious early on, I think working with technology, you learn a lot of other skills that aren't straight technology. So, again, that curiosity, the exploring, the experimentation, the tinkering, those sorts of skills are really fun to learn through technology. So, that's why I'm so keen to work with younger audiences. That's not to say, you don't work with older audiences. But I just imagine, I always think back, if I had these opportunities earlier on, what a difference that might have had. I mean, I already had a lot of opportunity. We were lucky to have computers quite early on in the 80s and 90s, and that had a massive difference in just, playing around and seeing what was possible and wanting to learn more. And that became formalized study and careers. So, yeah.
Were there barriers that you did experience as you were kind of coming up in the tech world that have made you more keen to make sure that younger women do know that this is a career path that they can and should pursue?
Yeah, there have been a couple of barriers. Some of them are related to just not awareness, like lack of awareness of what it means to work with engineering and technology and what career paths and studies look like. So going to events and talking to people, getting involved in competitions and going to the days that workplaces and companies and universities hold was really helpful, because I got to meet people who did this every day and ask them why they do it. It's not just the what, I think the why and the how is also super interesting, and people's journeys. What I thought happened in life looked like a straight line. You went to school, you went to uni, you got a job, and life progressed from there. But I think what I've really learned over time is life is a squiggly line. There's no one way to get there, and I didn't figure that out until I talked to different people and realized, actually, so long as you've got something you want to pursue, there will be a way to get there.
Yeah, I think that's such a good message, because I feel the same way. Like, as I was in my studies, I absolutely had no idea where I would end up. I was just kind of learning things that I was passionate about and love to learn. And I'm super happy to have landed where I am. But if you had even asked me a year ago where I would be, I wouldn't have thought here. So it's inspiring. And I think it's nice to know that no matter kind of where you've come from, as you say, if you have something in mind that you're really keen for, you can find a way to make it happen.
Yeah, and this is where, don't be shy to talk to people, because technology does change at a really fast pace. And yeah, that curiosity of figuring out what's out there, what's interesting, and just start tinkering with things. I started kind of coding websites when I was in high school because I started teaching it, and that became, I think, another seed that was planted. And then I kept coding at home, and yeah, you just never know where things might take you.
So I guess just one last question before we wrap up. I know that you kind of spoke about staying curious, but if you had any kind of words of wisdom for young women that are thinking about a career in technology, or that have a passion for it, or maybe don't think of themselves as a woman in tech, but don't really understand what that even means yet, what would those words of wisdom be?
One, be yourself. If someone tells you that you shouldn't be in tech, that's not true. Anybody can be in tech if they want to be, and should be in tech if they want to be. So yeah, explore what tech means to you. Tech isn't just coding. Tech could be, interaction design. It could be graphics and animation. It can be what you want it to be. For me, it became the computer processing of musical signals. Had someone asked me, as a high school student, is that a thing? I'd be like, what? You can do this? You're crazy. I think part of it is thinking about what you're interested in and the impact you want to make, and then seeing how technology can play a role in that and creating your own path. It's a squiggly line in action. I think that's what I would have told myself. I didn't have to choose between music or technology. It was really an and choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that you said at the beginning, you don't have to choose. I think that's something that's such a nice message to leave people with.
And can I ask, what would be your message to your younger self?
I guess I would say have some faith, don't have so much doubt. I think as I went along, it was a squiggly line. I didn't necessarily know where I was going. There was a lot of reflection of kind of being like, I like this, but is it the right thing? Is it going to get me where I want to go? Where am I going? So just to have some trust that, as you say, if you know what you're passionate about, if you know what really excites you, and you know what impact you want to make, then trust that, and trust that you'll find a way to make it happen. That's something I think I still try to tell myself, but I think it's a good lesson. Just, find what you love and figure out a way to do it. And I feel very lucky that I have been able to so far.
And I think also find a crew of people who share these interests and will support you, because that's where the collaboration piece comes in, and that's where you'll also meet a diverse crew, and you never know what might come out of that. friends become collaborators, collaborators become friends.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for coming today. It was so lovely to chat with you and hear a little bit more about your journey. And thanks to our viewers for watching.
Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it.